So episode 3, I mean, we really just look at the trial and what happens there. And, you know, with the trial, it was very much circumstantial evidence, but quite a lot of it. So it was almost like there wasn't really one big groundbreaking thing that made me think, you know, or anyone, I think, really think, oh, that, you know, he definitely did it because of that one factor. It was the fact that there was quite a lot of little things that did build up. But then a lot of those were completely unravelled during the trial. So again, that was something that I always kept in the back of my mind. So going through some of the stuff. So when I get into episode 3, you know, we start the scene by him going into the trial, and it's absolute pandemonium. There are people everywhere. There is press. He's brought in the van, you know, dropped off right outside the court, you know, ushered in through the crowds. There's probably a way to get him through the back, I'm sure.
I was just going to say, they usually take them around the back. That was...
Yeah, there you go. And there, I mean, at this point, so I've got to do my maths. I think he was 16 years old at the time of his trial.
Is that why they tried him as an adult? Because he, I mean, obviously at 16 you're not, but why was that decision made?
No, because they take it from when you were, from when you did the crime, but they basically just decided that he was competent enough to stand trial. So as an adult.
That's not right. Who made that decision?
Well, yeah.
And his defence, did he try and stop it?
Do you know what? There is not that much information on what his defence did. They certainly, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, so look, don't take this as a solid opinion, but there was a lot of stuff that they didn't do that they probably should have done that would have really helped unravel some of the points that the prosecution made, because they were circumstantial, it was very much how you perceived that piece of information. So for example, I mean, if we go through some of it, so for example, you know, the trial started in December 2004, by the way, so this was like a year and a half after her murder, and he was being tried as an adult. He was charged with the murder of Jodi and possession of a knife and supplying cannabis. He pled not guilty to all the charges, and he lodged his alibi and incrimination as his defence. It was a long trial. I mean, there was over 100 witnesses that were called. The judge was 62 years old, so he was very seasoned. He was very respected. And
it was 42 days, wasn't it? 42 days.
Yes, it was. And the jury, so I know in Scotland it's different. It's 15 in Scotland, and it was 8 men and 7 women. Right. Because often in Scotland you can have a majority verdict. So that's why they have an odd number. So the prosecution is based on 3 main pillars. And number 1, that Luke found the body. Well, we've kind of gone through that, haven't we? You know, that previously. Number 2, eyewitness accounts put in someone who resembled Luke around the murder scene at the time. And number 3, his alibi. So when we look at the eyewitness accounts, there was one lady called Andrina Bryson, and she's probably the most important part actually of the whole trial. So she claimed to have seen a male and a female, so both of them together. And this is someone putting them both together. So that was quite important, at the top of the East Houses Pass. So this is near to where Jodi's body was found. Andrina had gone to the supermarket, and her bank statement showed, her receipt, you know, showed that she had bought her shopping at 4:32 p.m. And then it was estimated that, you know, she got her kids in the car, sorted her bags out, got back in, and it was around 5 minutes later that she started driving. There were 2 potential routes that she could have taken to drive home. And one would have meant that she passed this path at 4:49 and the other at 5:54. But the issue was that Jodi's mum initially had said that she had kissed her daughter goodbye around 5 o'clock. But at trial, it was said that actually that might have been 4:50. So that was the first thing that just pricked my ears up a little bit. Yeah. Andrina said that she'd then seen the female from the side and that she had been talking to the male, and she described the male as looking like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. The only kind of similarity I can get there really is the long hair. They both got longish hair, so maybe. At the trial, the timings of Andrina's statement did vary from her original statement. So she'd originally said that she'd placed the sighting at 5:40 to 5:45. And then she had initially said that he was in his she thought he was in his early 20s, average height, medium build, with thick hair that was kind of like a sandy brown colour, and that he was wearing a green fishing style jacket, and that he had matching trousers. So from a distance, with your eyes squinted, potentially, but that wasn't completely accurate. She described the females having dark shoulder length hair, which, yeah, okay, a navy hoodie and light blue jeans. Jodi was wearing a black hoodie, but it had quite a large, bright orange logo on it of an American band called the Deftones. The coroner had said that Jodi's hair was auburn and not black at the time of her murder. So again, I mean, I was never going to pick this apart too much because, you know, from a distance, black and auburn, not massively different. It's not like she was saying it was bleach blonde. So I kind of, you know, I mention it, but it's not something that I delve too deep on. Then they talk about the position that they were in. So I think she ended up saying that like she saw the two people, like the two of them there, and they weren't doing anything out of the ordinary. But what really stood out, and I say this in the podcast quite clearly, was how Andrina ended up identifying Luke to the police. So we know the moment they found Jodi's body, the police put Luke out there as a potential suspect. That was very obvious with the home searches, and it was in the media. We know, obviously, that Luke was taken in under the Section 14 Act, and that was the 14th of August, wasn't it? So yeah, that would have been around 6 weeks later. So on that day, one of the policemen took a Polaroid photo of Luke, and it was against a white background. And then the other, so they've put them in a photo lineup, not in a real lineup. So they've given him standing against a white background, and then they've given some other randoms, whoever they were, and they weren't in front of a white background. So automatically that photo does look very different to the rest.
And they didn't have long hair either, did they?
No, they didn't. But then the absolute big kind of bombshell really from that episode was that when they got to court, the prosecution star witness, Andrina, comes up, and then she sees him in the dock, and she says that she doesn't recognise Luke to be the person that she saw that day.
Yeah, that was a big admission.
That was a big admission. Now I know, you know, a fair amount of time had passed. He did have a different hairstyle. There was through some of his trial, he had like braids. But that was quite eye-opening. And there was another couple of eyewitnesses as well. And they'd said they'd driven round, and then a cyclist had seen, and this is all in the podcast, and this goes into quite a lot of detail. But basically there was no consistent, it wasn't like all these people had said, I'd seen this person at this time here. If you actually look at the timeline and put all of these sightings together, and we go through it in episode 3, you know, in a proper, like, okay, so he was here at this time, then he was here, then he was here. You see that he only had a few minutes to do a few things that would have taken him a lot longer. So the timeline for me never worked. And I was quite surprised the prosecution hadn't actually, or maybe they did, and I don't know, they ignored it and maybe just thought that no one would notice, or maybe they didn't see it as problematic. But as an outsider looking in, I always thought, okay, that timeline doesn't correlate. It doesn't correlate. If all of those witnesses definitely saw Luke and Jodi, then there's no way they could have been in these different places at different times. Yeah. So that was a big one. And then going on through that as well, you know, there was talks of him, you know, being seen on the path. Then there's the stuff about the jacket. And then, you know, there was the missing knife pouch that comes back up in the trial. And again, you know, I've kind of mentioned this. This is something that does go ding, ding, ding in my head. Yeah. So they found something was missing, and it was the knife from the knife pouch when they went to search Luke's house. And it was not found during either of the searches of the house. The knife pouch had some inscriptions on it. So first off, it had 666, which I said, and then you mentioned it also had JJ. So Jodi Jones, and then it had 1989 to 2003. So yes, that was her year of birth and her date of birth. So then we look at the injuries that she had, and we go through the type of blade, and the knife that was used on Jodi was never found. But this knife that was missing was found by Corinne in her house. So she'd been in possession of the knife. She said that Luke didn't have the knife in his bedroom at the time. She only gave it to him when he needed it. And when she found it, she gave it to Luke's solicitor, who then handed it over to the police. Nothing was ever found on the knife. The police said that they thought she'd gone out and brought a replacement knife and the real knife had been hidden. But that knife they handed in and the Parker jacket, that then ended up with Corinne being arrested, because they thought then that she was now involved in buying these replica, Parker jackets and knives. So that's when that all kind of started to unravel. And I would really have liked to have interviewed Corinne, and I did use a clip of her from a previous interview. And in the Channel 5 documentary, it showed, she's an ill woman. She's very poorly, and she lives in absolutely awful circumstances. She's got no money. She's got no electricity. I don't even think she's got a toilet in her house. I think she has to go outside. Oh my God. The one and she's, she's an older woman now, and it's really, really sad. So we kind of go through all of that. We do go through Shane's statement, which we sort of touched on as well. So he's 7 years older than Luke, and he lived at home with Corinne and Luke. He worked, he had friends, he was a pretty normal guy. But on the day of Jodi's murder, he had gone to work. That was shown, and he usually came home at 3:30. On the 3rd of July, so that was 3 days after the murder, Shane told the police he came home, but he couldn't remember much about the night. His first statement was quite vague, said he couldn't remember what he had for dinner or when he went back out. And then his next statement was taken on the 7th of July, so 4 days later, and that was exactly a week after Jodi's murder. And he said that his friend had reminded him that on the night in question, he had stopped by his friend's house to help fix his car. But then his mum had also said that, well, no, you were at home because don't you remember Luke burnt the pies that he was cooking for us? And, they'd had a bit of a discussion about that. So that again was just something. And because, I don't think Shane, I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. He doesn't speak out about anything. He's got his own issues, and he doesn't talk to the press. It's absolutely fine. Totally respect that. But with that, the statement was quite vague. But again, if you said to me, what did you have for dinner last week? I haven't got a clue. And then there was a member of Jodi's family had also forgotten exactly where they'd been and what they'd eaten that night. Yeah. Now, I understand that as, that was a significant trauma. But obviously, that pressure on Shane, maybe that could have done the same to his brain. That's the only thing that I would have said. But that was again something that, you would hope that if your brother was being looked at for a potential murder, that you would try your best to really, try and remember that. But yeah, there was a thing about Shane, and he was saying that he was at home, but he was looking at porn on the internet, and he didn't think his mum or Luke were home. So again, that raises questions, absolutely raises questions. One thing that was really, really bad, though, was that during the trial, when he was being cross-examined, they showed him pictures of Jodi when she was dead, naked and mutilated.
There was no need to do that.
Absolutely none. And that was obviously in front of all the friends, family, the jurors, everybody got to see that. Mm-hmm. And he asked to take a break, and then he was asked to look at more photos. He wasn't given that break. And he was seen to be wiping away tears in the box as well. So there was a lot of back and forth. And in the end, Shane sort of said, I don't know if Luke was in the house or not. I can't be sure. My days are all confused. I remember something about fixing a friend's car. I remember burnt pies. But instead of lying and coming up with a narrative, he just said, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I do think that it does feel like strong evidence against Luke. It does feel like the prosecution maybe got a one-up on that, and it didn't look great for him. But again, I don't think that's enough to say that he definitely did it. And that was really all they had. There was nothing else that was groundbreaking during that trial that made. I mean, they touched on the Marilyn Manson stuff as well. So, we're kind of going into episode 4 a bit here, but the police had painted this picture of the guy, I think, without really knowing him. And then all this stuff about Marilyn Manson and him being a Satan worshipper and going up the path and, you know, coming back on the path. And was it him that found it? Was it the dog? There's just so much. When you put it all together, it just doesn't really make sense to me. So just to summarise it, you know, the three pillars, like I said, were, you know, that Shane's alibi was sketchy. And in the end, he ended up saying, I don't know, that Luke found the body, but along with other people, and that he had been an eyewitness had placed him near to the crime scene. And that was basically it. And yeah, it was 42 days long. I mean, that is a long time to sit through a trial.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've been recording this now for like 2.5 hours. And we're kind of looking at this and we're confused over some things. You know, we get bamboozled by things. We're like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot about that. Mm-hmm. Or I forgot about that.
Which is surprising because of how short amount of time it took them to come up with a verdict, because 42 days worth of circumstantial evidence, all this information, that was really quick.
Yes.
That was really quick. Too quick, I think.
Well, potentially, yeah. I mean, there was, for me, because it was a majority verdict as well, you know, we don't know what that was. And in Scotland, there is something that prohibits jurors from talking to the press afterwards. Okay. So we've never, but you know, no one's ever really got into the minds of what the jury thought. So that's what happened. And then he was sentenced. And I sort of try and go back to that in there and try and really think about what they must have all been feeling, because like I said, it was a media circus. There were so many people that was so invested on this trial. And even actually halfway through the trial, it's worth saying that 2 newspapers actually reported stories. The BBC wrote an article that said, no DNA link in Jodi murder. And the Times wrote a headline, no DNA evidence to link boyfriend with Jodi murder.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was really big for me, because I thought they're 2 very reputable
they're
sources.
saying there's nothing.
Yeah, it's not, you know, a kind of red top tabloid. These are proper news outlets. So that, for me, that was just something that really made me think. And it just, you know, this was national news now. And actually, for small town Scotland to be in the national news, that was mad. But it took them just 5 hours to reach this majority verdict. And that
is crazy.
After 42 days, I mean, look, maybe they just wanted to get the hell out of there. 5 hours, that's crazy. But what that tells me is that I wasn't in that jury room, of course, but for 5 hours, that tells me that everyone believed what they believed. And maybe they did change their mind within that 5 hours, but they would have had to have been convinced quite a lot after 42 days. Because it seems to me, whatever that was.
I think I would have gone in there as a jury member saying, I haven't got a bloody clue, we're going to have to debate this. And I would have had to go through each thing and saying, but what about, but there's this. And with it, that's what I would have needed. Unless they went in there and there was a certain amount of people, the majority were like, yep, we think he's guilty. And that's what won it. There was not much debating going on. Where could they get a jury? Like you said, this was national. Everybody knew what was going on. How are they going to get a jury that is impartial?
I know.
That's another thing.
I know.
No way.
And then the sentencing come around. So it's 20 years minimum. Oh. And look, I am all for long sentences. I think that crimes like this, you know, it infuriates me when I find out that, you know, somebody who's killed a child gets 8 years or something. You know, it's the one thing about our justice system, especially, that I hate. 20 years minimum for someone who's 16. It means they could be out by the time they're 36. So, you know, they can have a life. They could have kids. They could get married. Okay, that's great. But if he is innocent, then actually he's lost his best years.
Yeah.
And that was always something that stuck with me. But at the time, that judge had been told by a jury that he was guilty. So actually, maybe that was an adequate sentence. I don't know if necessarily blame the judge for the sentencing because it was such a horrific crime. And there would need to be some serious rehabilitation in here. And the way she was taken was just awful. But it's just always that, but what if?
It's the what if.
What if?
Especially when, like you say, it was all circumstantial evidence. And the timeline even, like I said, the jury sit there and actually plot it out and say, hang on a minute, I just wonder I want to know what's going on in that jury room but were they maybe just bamboozled by all this, and the prosecution sounds like they were just throwing the kitchen sink at it, everything. And maybe they're just like, oh, you've lost me.
Yes.
But, with what you were saying about Luke on the stand and just saying at the end, you know what, I don't know, doesn't say to me that, he's let his brother down, but at the same time, if Luke did do it and his mum was protecting him and his brother was, getting on it, then they would have had a story straight, wouldn't they? They would have had it straight by then. They would have had it perfect, and he wouldn't be confused. He would just know this is the story, stick to it.
Yeah.
So the fact he admitted that was maybe tells a wee bit more telling than what we
absolutely.
Really.
And then we go on to, so obviously now he's now serving his sentence. He's tried to appeal the sentence many times, but it's worth mentioning, this for me was the most jaw-dropping thing actually out of everything. So the person that looks at the appeals is the Lord Advocate, and her name is Dorothy Bain, and she's rejected those appeals. They don't have to give a reason why, so they can just reject. They can say something very flippant, like, we believe that, there's no cause for speculation about any other suspects in this case, or whatever. We feel like we've got the right person. We did a fair trial. We're happy with the investigation. But then I find out that Dorothy Bain is married to Alan Turnbull, who was the prosecutor in Luke's trial. And that for me is, come on, Scotland's not that small. There's got to be other people. You can't take that, surely.
There's a conflict of interest, if ever there was one. There must be. She must have a deputy or something that in these circumstances should be able to. But then would she be impartial, whoever the deputy was?
Exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? We don't know if they're all at dinner parties together every Sunday. Who knows,
But that's frightening that you're stuck. That's it.
That's it. You're kind of stuck.
So, I wanted to just mention about Andrina, because she gave an amazing description of these two, the boy and the girl she saw as she was just driving past. If I'm driving, I don't really notice anything. I mean, she was driving, not in the passenger seat. So how was she able to give such a detailed description, the jacket and the everything? Two of them.
Yeah, it did seem, for something, because I thought when I read her statement, I thought after she described them that she would maybe say something like, she saw them fighting, or she saw them arguing, or really animated. But none of that came. So that did always make me think that was a lot of detail for someone to remember, especially with children in the back of the car as well. Like,
just God, about the children. How?
Knowing, like, they're always kicking your seat, or I think they were quite young children from what I remember. So I did always think, okay, well, that's a lot of detail. Maybe she's just a really observant person, but it definitely did make me think and ponder for a little while.
Yeah, it did me as well. It really did. Unless you were sitting in traffic, but even if you're sitting in traffic and you notice something, as soon as you move off, it's gone. I mean, maybe that's just me because I have a horrendous memory, but maybe other people can retain things.
I think, you know what? I mean, knowing the road, because I went on Google Street View and I did the route, and I also, on the Channel 5 documentary, Murder in a Small Town, one of the detectives, he actually does that route, and he's got I think it's his niece in the car, who's a young woman, and they're driving past, and he doesn't really tell her what they're doing, and she spots they plant some people there, and she spots them, and she can't recall them, even though she's not driving, and she knows that she's supposed to be looking out for something. So that's quite an interesting scene to watch, actually, because it does kind of put you in there a bit. Lots of people have tried to talk to Andrina Bryson, but she's never spoken to the press. And I believed she moved out of Scotland, actually, as well.
Wow. Okay. I can understand why she didn't talk to the press, because that was, I mean, it was hinging on that, really, wasn't it? Her statement was really gone on. So yeah,
absolutely.
it's frightening. And
yeah.
I was going to say, so the couple that she saw, and obviously they thought it was Luke and Jodi, but did the police make an appeal for NMJ to come forward if maybe was that you, or did they decided that's who it was?
Yeah, I mean, I never ever saw any evidence of that come out. There was never any other names that were associated directly with that sighting. And that should have been something, I think, that should have been looked into a lot, especially as it, like you say, it was one of the main things that they were holding this case up with in court. The law does say, and I've looked into this, where a physical person identity parade can be done, then it should be done. So that was one thing. It was a photo lineup. So she was given these photos. Mm-hmm. So there was again, in that documentary, there was someone who was an expert in eyewitness testimony. And he said, if you put someone in front of a white background, it looks like a police station, doesn't it? It looks like a holding cell. It looks very much like a mugshot. So, all those little things, they could potentially subconsciously filter through.
Mm-hmm. And your eyes are going to be they're going to be drawn to that stark white background as well, aren't they? So, yeah.
I would imagine so, yeah. And especially with only having one guy with the long hair as well. I would have thought all of them would have had long hair.
So was that just the police that were involved in that? Because I remember watching one time, well, like you said, they're supposed to bring in person, and then they're supposed to have the solicitor with them as well. So none of that was done. It was just done behind Luke's back completely. Just did it themselves. Nobody supervising, I feel like.
Yeah, they must have done, because that was how she identified him.
That's bad. Okay, I've got to come back again, and we talked about this, but I've made a note of it again, and it must have really stuck in my mind, and it's the burning smell. I've written down that it was a female member of the family who had said they'd burned the clothing. I've got that somewhere. I've written it again. Mm-hmm. Was that not right?
No, so it was a Parker jacket that Luke apparently had on, and one of their neighbours, they were interviewed, door-to-door inquiries, and they said, because they searched the house, they couldn't find any evidence. So one of the things they have to consider is, has anything been burnt or destroyed? And so they did have a kind of log burner thing in the back garden. So they asked the neighbours, did anyone smell any burning? And someone said, yes, someone was having some kind of fire or bonfire or something that night. But from what I believe, and it was quite murky, this particular bit. And actually, of all the things in this case, this is the one that I never completely got my head completely around, because they did look in the log burner and there were no clothing fibres in there. It also wasn't clean, but yet they were still quite certain that because this one neighbour had smelt some sort of fire, and they didn't straight away say, oh yes, it was that house. It was just generally someone in the area. I guess if you think, if one of your neighbours had a barbecue, if you live on a normal road, where there's several houses, you're not going to know exactly who that is unless you kind of had a look. So again, that just struck me as something that was a bit odd, that there was no fibres found in that log burner, but it was dirty.
I see. It's very like Luke as well. Nothing found on him, but it was dirty. It's like a pattern going on here, isn't there?
That's right.
Crazy.
And I think just due to that, how brutal that murder was, that poor girl suffered so much. You'd have to be a genius, really, to be able to evade all DNA detection, I think, and still be dirty. That's pretty mad.
Yeah, he's a clever lad if he's able to do that, really.
Well, yeah.
Some skills.
Yes. But at 14, I was doing my times tables, I think you forget how young 14 is sometimes, it's so young. You're midway through secondary school. Maybe that's me being much older than 14 now.
Me too, but yeah, I'm trying to think back, and I was like, nope, not clear. That's a long time ago.
We probably thought we were much older than we were. But,
we knew it all back then, didn't we?
Absolutely.
Who said that he was wearing this? What happened about the Parker jacket? I know somebody said he was wearing it, and he said no, never had it. But then his mum went and bought a green Parker jacket. When did this story all start, and why did she do that when it was going on?
Oh God, I know. So there was
a blue one. It would have been all right.
Well, yeah. Do you know what? There were several discrepancies, and a really good source for this was just looking through some of the witness testimony and seeing this, because some of there was a couple of boys that Luke went to school with, and they said that they'd seen him sitting on a wall, or they'd been sitting on the wall and he'd walked past. I can't remember which way round it was, but they'd seen him wearing this kind of green Parker jacket. And Andrina Bryson, she'd gone by and she'd said he was wearing a kind of green fishing jacket sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So call me a bit ignorant, but those sort of coats I would sort of think would look the same, so I wouldn't kind of spit feathers on them. But the boys said, it's the coat that Luke wears all the time. The only thing was, no one, including Luke's family, had a photo of him in this jacket. So for him to have worn that all the time and to no one have had a photo of him with it would just made me think, oh, that's a bit strange. And then he did have a green Parker jacket after his house had got searched and the police had taken a lot of the stuff into evidence. His mum obviously was like, oh, well, you're going to need some new clothes. So she went out and got that, I think not knowing the significance of a green Parker jacket. So that's where it all becomes very, very, very confusing.
It is. What the hell was with that Parker? I couldn't get past that. And about the photos, I know what you're saying, but I don't remember taking a lot of photos, unless we were on holiday when we were young.
Yeah, true.
So I just didn't get that. That one stuck with me as well. It was another one.
It always felt quite flimsy to me, anyway. I think there were definitely other pieces of evidence that were definitely more damning, if you like.
Oh yes,
it really felt like they kind of played on the confusion, on these details that didn't really hold much weight, but they put together a lot of tiny little bits of what they thought was circumstantial evidence. But actually, I don't think it was. I think it just felt like a bit like they were grasping at straws sometimes. As an outsider looking in, they probably know, the police. I don't completely distrust them. I'm sure that there is something in there and something that drove them, and there was more of a reason maybe that was ever made public. But it did just seem, it seemed like a big part of the case when really forensically, there was nothing there to prove it. And that's what I would have been really trying to focus on, I think, really trying to forensically link him instead of talking about the fact that he possibly burnt a jacket that nobody could actually confirm that he definitely had.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can't decide whether, the devil's advocate, where the three of them in it together, Luke, his brother and his mum, and they'd come up with what to say, and they had the jacket and they burnt the jacket and blah, 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 all that, and they were covering up. And I don't know, well then when Shane was on the stand, he just said, you know what, I can't remember. So was that him he just couldn't go along with the lie and he's just been like, oh, I don't know, to try and get himself out of it? Or did he genuinely just not remember? And there was no cover up, there was no lie. I don't know. There's a couple of sticking points, I think. I'm not sure.
I think, yeah, it's, you know what, his brother's never really spoken out afterwards. And I totally understand that. There was a big media, furore going on, and he would, I'm sure, probably have, suffered from that had he spoken out more. And that was always a thing. When I was going through it, I was like, you kind of will him to say something useful.
Yeah. But it was really honest of him to just say on the stand. Yeah. I did think that good for you for being honest, because he could have just lied and stuck to a story if there was one, but he didn't. He told the truth.
I did think that. I did think it's much easier to kind of stick to a story. There would have been time for them to have spoken, but he didn't have the answer. And seemingly, I mean, look, he could be an award-winning actor, but I don't think he is. I think that generally he just didn't know.
If he was an award-winning actor, then he would act and make them believe that, yes, his brother was in there. He couldn't.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
He wouldn't want his brother. He would have wanted to help if he could. So that one made me think he's telling the truth. That's what I thought about that one. We talked about the knife as well previously, and how, the knife wasn't found, and then Luke had his knife, but then his mum found it and gave it to her solicitor, and they gave it to the police, but they thought that was the original. She'd bought him that and it was replacement. But did they ever look into that? Did they ever find out where she bought it, when she bought it? Did they do any investigation at all, Naomi? Or did they just not?
I mean, I had access to some of the stuff. There was some stuff I didn't have access to. And the knife was always the point. And I was really clear when I spoke to different people who, do support Luke. I always said, the thing that bothers me the most about this whole case is the knife, and is about the knife pouch. And there was an episode, which is later on, where I do interview some of his supporters. And some of them said, I said, is there something that, because they believe Luke is innocent. They'll come up and say it. I'm not 100% there, so I won't ever say it. I don't think I'd ever say it about anyone, because I just don't know unless you're there or you've got some sort of real physical proof. My feeling is that something is wrong here, but they are very convinced that no, he is innocent. But I said to them, there must be something that casts some doubt. And it was always the knife that was brought up. The circumstances re the search of the knife. I mean, all I know is that they searched it, they find the pouch, they took photos of the pouch. It did have JJ, the initials JJ, and then the year of Jodi's birth, and then the year of her death. So that was quite poignant. That to me was very eerie. And I think it was because it was on the knife pouch, and knowing that a knife was used in the attack.
Yeah.
That all very much doesn't sit completely right with me. But then the explanation that was given, it's not incomprehensible. His mother, might have taken the knife off of him or just given it to him when he needed it. But I would have thought it was in the pouch. That's the bit that trumps me every time.
Okay.
What did you think about the knife?
I didn't think about what was written on the pouch. I honestly didn't overthink that. I just thought that was him just expressing himself. But the knife, yeah, I wanted them to have done more in digging into that to be conclusive. When did you buy it? Is there proof you bought the knife before? I wanted more research to be done. I wanted more, like you say, facts. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's annoying.
Yeah.
I think the police should have a list and tick boxes, and until every tick box has been done and they're satisfied, then I don't think that investigation should ever stop.
Yes.
I want to know. You need to know.
I know. It really, really is something that I think a lot of people have mentioned as well. And people that do think that, Luke is in prison rightfully, I know that it is something that, they use as convincing for their argument. And I do, you do end up seeing both sides.